Good afternoon. It's good to be with you today. I'm Josh Griffin from Ohio EPA, serving as the Lake Erie Program Manager, and I'll be taking the lead on the webinar today. Our project team is also participating and will be available to help answer questions. Our project team includes other Ohio EPA staff and staff from the Ohio Department of Agriculture and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Ohio Lake Erie Commission staff and Director Joy Mullenix have also been active in helping us coordinate with our sister agencies. Tetra Tech is helping coordinate the webinar logistics and will facilitate the questions and answers component at the end of the presentation. Not all questions will be answered today, but we are keeping records of them. Some unanswered questions may be incorporated into the frequently asked questions document on the webpage. We anticipate updating the FAQs around the time the PMR is public notice. Other questions might not be addressed today because they involve future management decisions in the TMDL process. We have two topics to address today. First, we will provide an overview of implementation and adaptive management. Then we will share some notes about NPDES permitting. The TMDL development process in Ohio leverages adaptive management, and we have received a lot of questions about what adaptive management is and how it will be used in this TMDL. We are currently developing an implementation strategy based on assessments that have identified impairments in the Western Lake Erie Basin. The initial strategy is developed as part of the TMDL process. A component of that strategy is a process of continuous improvement or adaptive management. Adaptive management starts with setting goals or establishing milestones to provide clear targets for implementation measures. Implementing the strategy is given equal weight in this graphic, but it is the most resource-intensive part of the process that involves many local, state, and federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, and private businesses. To inform adaptive management, we need to monitor the watershed and the lake to link implementation to the desired environmental response. We need to evaluate that information by defining metrics which turn the monitoring data into information. Then we can use that information to adjust the strategy. On the coming slides, I will share additional information about each of these steps of implementation and adaptive management. At this point in the TMDL process, we are developing the initial strategy in the PMR. Implementation efforts have been underway for over a decade, and we have seen research, funding, and policy changes start to shape the response to the monumental challenge of addressing today's water quality issues in Lake Erie. International cooperation has set the goalposts for phosphorus management to address HABs. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative at the federal level and Governor DeWine's H2 Ohio initiative, among others, have focused resources on addressing HABs in Lake Erie. Farmers are tasked with changing the ways they farm and how they think about their link to water quality. Historically, recommendations were focused on managing soil loss, with the results bearing out within the Maumee watershed. Fish species, such as the big-eyed chub and sand darters, sensitive to sediment, have been expanding their presence throughout their historic range. That success, in part, led to today's challenges, and we now know that phosphorus management extends beyond the soil's surface. At the same time, these challenges are exacerbated by increasing precipitation in the Great Lakes region, and we are routinely managing precipitation that ranks among the wettest years on record. With this TMDL, we continue tackling one of the biggest water quality challenges we have faced in the region. Non-point sources are the largest component of total load. Consequently, they have been and will continue to be the focal point of reduction efforts. Tackling the non-point source challenge focuses on addressing key resource concerns for nutrient management, erosion management, water management, and considerations for emerging technology. Recognizing the magnitude of the challenge of managing non-point source phosphorus loads, we include a focus on managing how water moves across the landscape. These efforts have focused on restoring wetlands, stream channels, and floodplain connectivity, restoring the functions once provided by these areas of the landscape. While point sources have reduced phosphorus from historic levels, ongoing efforts to manage combined sewer overflows, stormwater, and failing household sewage treatment systems in unsewered communities will continue phosphorus reductions. The preliminary modeling results will propose specific strategies to meet our phosphorus reduction targets and therefore address impairments caused by Lake Erie harmful algal blooms. Ultimately, the goal of TMDL implementation is to restore the beneficial uses of Lake Erie and delist the impairments. That goal is not enough, knowing that achieving success will be the culmination of many actions that incrementally improve the watershed. These are broadly categorized as planning and development milestones, characterized in red, and implementation milestones, characterized in blue. Planning and development milestones to promote program development and coordination are needed for successful implementation. In the PMR, we will be considering the following planning milestones. To ensure H2 Ohio has the maximum impact, agricultural BMPs need to adapt to emerging research. Following establishment of this TMDL, Ohio EPA will have to develop NPDES permits consistent with the strategy. Ohio programs rely on the NRCS 590 nutrient management standard, which was recently revised. These updates are considered during program reviews. We continue close intergovernmental coordination, ensuring regular meetings between implementing state and federal agencies for consistent goals and objectives. Water management is important to our success as important to our success as nutrient management, but many promising practices have not been universally accepted. Continuing research and developing practice standards will facilitate water management as TMDL implementation progresses. Implementation milestones are those that result in measurable changes on the landscape and bring about needed outcomes. In the PMR, we are considering the following implementation milestones: increasing the cropland acres with approved voluntary nutrient management plans, addressing unsewered communities, implementing natural infrastructure, expanding controlled drainage. This is one way to manage water. It is not appropriate for all fields or situations, so identifying a milestone needs to recognize those limitations. And increasing participation in voluntary programs through H2 Ohio. These types of actions all require coordination among many partners, including all levels of government, nonprofit organizations, and individual landowners. Tracking these projects is often tied to the organization providing funding, and milestone could account for all of these actions. Additional detail will be added to the milestones as the final TMDL develops, and additional milestones can be defined. They can recognize incremental progress while also capturing the highest level objectives. Achieving measurable success requires discrete actions to be identified for implementing the strategy. These implementation efforts cut across all resource concerns identified in the preliminary strategy. While point sources have done much to reduce their role in phosphorus loading in the Maumee watershed, several actions have been identified that will continue this trajectory. Because point sources are regulated by the Clean Water Act, implementation is often facilitated through NPDES permit requirements and other enforceable documents. For combined sewer overflows, ongoing implementation of long-term control plans will further reduce their contribution. For home sewage treatment systems, human health-led priorities will continue to drive management of failing household sewage treatment systems, and actions to manage these systems will result in phosphorus reductions. Stormwater permits for MS4 communities include requirements for managing pollutants with a waste load allocation in TMDLs. However, the practices identified in the current permit do not specifically address dissolved reactive phosphorus. Additional consideration will be given to promote stormwater practices more effective at managing dissolved phosphorus. Finally, waste load allocations for treatment facilities will need to be considered as NPDES permits are developed. Enhancing non-point source phosphorus sinks is an important part of the strategy to restore natural infrastructure that promotes phosphorus removal. These efforts are priorities that cross many public and private organizations. Ohio's efforts have been amplified through the implementation of H2 Ohio with a focus on natural infrastructure through the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Federal GLRI funding through US EPA has been prioritized for wetland and habitat restorations to meet the goals of the Maumee Area of Concern Beneficial Use Impairment category, known as the loss of habitat and wildlife. US EPA also passes GLRI funding through to Ohio to address state priorities, including natural infrastructure. The Farm Service Agency implements the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, which incentivizes preservation of riparian and wetland areas that have a history of agricultural use. Land conservancies, such as the Black Swamp Conservancy and numerous nonprofit groups, continue to promote and facilitate critical wetland and other habitat restorations. Together, these organizations are working to transform the landscape to meet nutrient reduction goals while providing additional benefits for wildlife and society. Because non-point sources are the largest source, the efforts to reduce phosphorus through non-point source management is critical to attaining target conditions to meet the TMDL. This includes planning efforts, funding priorities, and policy implementation affecting how agricultural nutrients are managed in the Maumee River watershed. Planning efforts include the development of the US and Ohio's domestic action plans, as well as the development of local 9-element non-point source implementation strategies. Funding priorities include H2 Ohio funding through the Ohio Department of Agriculture, the NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program's Tri-State Western Lake Erie Basin Phosphorus Reduction Initiative. That one's a mouthful. NRCS GLRI funding providing prioritization for the Maumee River watershed, and Ohio EPA's 319 funding. Policy implementation includes implementation of the fertilizer applicator certification programs and continuing implementation of the ban on manure and fertilizer applications on frozen and snow-covered ground. To ensure that implementation efforts are on track, we have to measure indicators. To visualize an effective monitoring strategy, we are using a pyramid where the lower level measures support environmental changes happening above them, leading to the top where Lake Erie water quality measures are represented. Starting at the base, we must build a strong foundation tracking implementation measures. At this most fundamental level, we can determine if programs are resulting in changes to the landscape. Moving up the pyramid, we look to intermediate indicators that management practices are having real impacts on the landscape. This includes aggregated soil test phosphorus data to help us understand the extent of legacy phosphorus, monitoring the inputs of agricultural fertilizers, commercial fertilizer and manure, crop removal of nutrients, monitoring data from point sources, and measures of watershed hydrology. The next level up includes direct measures of water quality at the field or project scale. Here we monitor that BMPs are having the desired real-world impacts. Then we move to load monitoring in streams throughout the watershed. These gauging stations are tiered, starting with sentinel watersheds representing the varied characteristics throughout the watershed, then Puck 8 scale gauges representing subregions in the watershed, and culminating near the watershed mouth, where chemistry and hydrology have been paired for greater than 40 years to show long-term loading trends at the basin scale. Monitoring data within Lake Erie are measures of ultimate success. Data collected include algal toxins at drinking water intakes and satellite monitoring for the extent and duration of harmful algal blooms. Monitoring data is important, but to make use of the data, we have to turn it into information. We need to set metrics that can be used to evaluate success or lead to change. These metrics are visualized using the same pyramid structure as the monitoring data. Again, starting at the bottom, we'll summarize individual actions. There are existing structures to do this, including tracking near-field TMDLs and 9-element plans by Ohio EPA, the Ohio Agricultural Conservation Initiative's metrics for agricultural BMPs, and NRCS SEEP assessments. Intermediate indicators can be evaluated by summarizing trends in soil test phosphorus and trends in the agricultural phosphorus mass balance. Edge of field and project scale monitoring data are used to evaluate agricultural practices by our research community. The outcomes of these studies will be evaluated. Currently, there are many active projects where results are expected in the next 2 to 5 years, including H2 Ohio's wetland study, the Army Corps P Optimal Wetland Study, a paired watershed project testing BMP efficacy in 2 small tributaries, Potato and Shallow Run, ongoing SWAP model evaluations of implementation scenarios, a legacy P project, a legacy phosphorus project, and many more. Tributary load monitoring data can be summarized using flow-weighted mean concentration, trend analysis tools, and are routinely used for Ohio's nutrient mass balance study and by Annex 4 work groups. Lake Erie data is summarized by NOAA using the Bloom Severity Index and in metrics developed by Ohio's integrated report. The integrated report metrics will determine the ultimate success for this TMDL when Lake Erie impairments are delisted. To complete the adaptive management circle, we have to use the information gathered to adjust the strategy. We need to define when, why, and how adjustments would occur. Adjustments can occur at any time as implementation programs develop. Individual programs get feedback on program effectiveness and work on program-specific planning frames. Adaptive implementation is intrinsic to that process, and while the TMDL provides useful information to the program, it does not change how implementing agencies operate. TMDL-focused implementation evaluations are proposed so these ongoing changes are documented. Adaptation could be driven by a metric that shows a program is not having a desired outcome, or a metric could show that a practice is showing positive outcomes. State agencies might also adapt to policy changes that require additional implementation. Not all adaptations to the implementation strategy happen the same way. Conservation programs evolving is part of the plan. These don't require special considerations to improve programs. Some changes might affect the assumptions made to develop the TMDL. These would require additional stakeholder outreach by Ohio EPA. For example, if a change is proposed that affects the technology considered for compliance with NPDES permit limits, if adaptations affect the allocations or reasonable assurances, additional federal review and approval may be necessary. For example, if Annex 4 identifies different targets, the TMDL process would have to be revisited in whole, including the federal review and approval. Much of the discussion thus far has been about implementing changes for non-point sources. We have been meeting with representatives from the point source community and discussing implementation as well. Today, we want to share those ideas with the larger group. Existing loads from the point source community are consistent with the proposed waste load allocation, but individual waste load allocations would not always be met. We are proposing a watershed general permit where loads to be managed as a bubble rather than individual compliance in permits. Approximately 35 dischargers contribute 85% of the phosphorus load from permitted facilities. Since these facilities are where phosphorus management is more cost effective, smaller facilities would not be included in the general permit. We need to account for new or expanding facilities, but explicitly reserving load would require reductions from existing sources in the watershed. Instead, in the PMR, Ohio is proposing to account for growth by facilitating load reductions through requiring better technology for new, expanding, or upgrading facilities, continuing optimization programs, and considering emerging technologies where they improve existing treatment abilities. This should allow growth to be accounted for through future reductions at a time when treatment improvements are made on marginal cost increases rather than capital expenditures that are not linked to other facility plans. As part of your handouts for today's webinar, we included the project schedule. The schedule has not been updated since the last webinar, but we included it again today for those who may be new joining us and to highlight upcoming events. The PMR is coming soon. A webinar is planned for June 29th, and we will discuss the overall report structure and content. The report will have a 30-day comment period, and we are planning an in-person meeting for a detailed overview of each section of the report. This will be on July 14th and held in Bowling Green with a virtual option for participants. That wraps up what I have to share today. So kick it over to Barry for the questions and answers.
All right, thanks, Josh. It is time for our question and answer session. If you do have a question, click on the questions tab and you can type your questions into the box there and we will receive those and answer the questions related to today's webinar. We do have a question that's come in here. Without monitoring streams and targeting streams with the largest DRP loads, this fails in a huge way to get serious about reducing DRP to reduce harmful algal blooms. And I think Paul is going to be responding to this.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Barry. This is Paul Gledhill, and I'm with Division of Surface Water at Ohio EPA. And Josh, if you could switch back to the first pyramid slide, kind of help accentuate my points here. So there is a really robust network of stream monitoring that's happening throughout the Maumee. So way more than just the edge of stream monitoring. These are actually in tributaries. They're just like the Heidelberg monitoring station in Waterville, but we have them. There's over 25 stations just in the Maumee. We have them on some really small tributaries that we think are telling us different things about different land uses. We have them at several small watersheds, medium-sized tributaries, and then kind of the large tributaries, which Josh referred to as the Huck 8s outlets. And you can see that all that there. That's on the dark green part of the pyramid there, second from the top. So we are learning a lot about phosphorus, DRP, and total phosphorus, particulate phosphorus at these gauges. I would refer any questionnaires or people interested in that, Ohio's Domestic Action Plan that you can find on the Ohio Lake Area Commission's website. Appendix G, we actually show a map, 2 maps of where those stations are, and we have them listed. All of the data is freely available to download. And then kind of getting at the questions about showing differences in DRP, the PMR that's coming out here in a month, we are looking at those data. There will be an analysis of existing research that's already been published, and then new analysis that we've done looking at these different tributary sites and kind of identifying hotter and cooler spots within the watershed.
All right, thanks, Paul. We are getting a few more questions in. As Josh mentioned, there may be some questions that we get that relate to future management decisions that we won't be answering today, but we do appreciate those questions. Those will all be captured and considered with responses, possibly incorporated into the frequently asked questions document, which is being updated. So let's see, any more questions coming in? Yes, here's another one here. Can you provide more details on the general permit for the point sources and which facilities are included in the 35? Lastly, was that discussed with the point source communities or with the non-point source communities? And I think, Josh, this question's for you.
Yeah, so we shared those initial proposals with a subgroup of some point sources, and the complete list is something we're kind of continuing to fine tune, but we're definitely planning on some additional efforts and outreach to folks who we would be proposing in that group to make sure that they're aware of what's in the PMR and when it's coming out. And after there's limited detail on exactly what that general permit is at this point. Conceptually, it's something that could allow us to manage loads against a bubble community-wide, and that kind of facilitates a lot of flexibility and options for trading and different things. Something that's been used in other states for similar TMDLs where you're affecting a far field water body like Lake Erie. So a lot to come, and after that PMR and after folks have the ability to kind of see that proposal with some more detail, we definitely want to kind of visit those ideas with all of those who would be affected.
All right, thanks, Josh. Just scanning through the question table for some additional questions here. Okay, we are seeing some questions come in. I think some of these are, again, for related to future management decisions. Here's one that's come in here. Regarding the watershed general permit for NPDES facilities, Josh referred to that as a bubble permit. Is that a bubble permit like those used in cap and trade permit schemes, or did he say bubble as in an overarching permit? Trying to figure out if permitted facilities are going to be trading. And again, Josh, that one's for you.
So, with the angle of trading, there's if you're measuring compliance against the total load from the community, some facilities may do better in one year or season than another facility. So in that context, there's an advantage of measuring compliance across that broader averaging spectrum. So in a way, it's kind of de facto trading without requiring trading, just by leveraging that averaging component. Now, if trading were to be something, it would kind of have to be on the it's really up to the community affected by the permits, the way that we develop our trading programs in Ohio. And So if it were decided that that was the most efficient way to manage loads under the bubble, the group or entity would have to develop a trading plan that could be submitted to the agency for review and approval, and then implemented from there. So it certainly makes trading easier option to implement, but it's not coming out of the gate saying that we need to have a trading program for people.
Okay, thanks again, Josh. Another question, how will you track progress of the 4R program? Do you have information on where the cropland is enrolled in the program? And I think that's for Kirk.
Barry, so thanks for that question. Great question. Really the 4R program, let me just start there. Certainly, that's industry led and there is oversight of that program. But probably more importantly, what I wanted to share is, it really goes hand in hand, that program does, with H2 Ohio program here in Ohio. So right now, the one thing that we have oversight for here within the state would be the percent, we're about 35% of the acres in this watershed are enrolled for voluntary nutrient management plans, where the Department of Agriculture, the soil and water conservation districts really look over that and work to see that program is implemented on those acres. So that information, it's really just now being implemented. So we'll just now be seeing the results of that. We're just in the first year of that. But the information will be aggregated at the farm level and then on up, really at the watershed level and available at that watershed level as we see implementation as we go on. So certainly we're excited about that and think that information will be valuable, and we think really that we'll see success as that's implemented as well.
All right, thanks, Kirk. Another question about the bubble permit concept. If a small NPDES discharger outside the bubble has a nutrient enrichment problem in the receiving stream, would they still be subject to corrective action to get that stream into Clean Water Act attainment? And Paul, this question is directed for you.
Sure, I can start that question, and maybe others would want to add to that. But when we have local impairments to the beneficial uses we assess in streams, we consider that a near field issue. Now, this TMDL we call a far field TMDL because we're addressing an issue that is from pollutants through the watershed, but the issue is downstream. It's caused by the harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie. So we deal with the near field issues with near field TMDLs, and we have existing near field TMDLs in the Maumee, and there will be others in the future. They're basically two separate tracks, and this TMDL is really to address the far field issues. So if there are local issues, they will be addressed via the near field TMDLs that occur. And if Melinda Harris, our TMDL coordinator, is on the line, and you're welcome to add to that.
Hi, this is Melinda. Paul, you were correct that any impairments that we find downstream facilities would be handled through our near field TMDLs, our existing ones, and any future ones that we're developing right now on the watershed.
All right, thanks. A question about BMPs. How will you track the success of the BMP program? That's for you, Josh.
So as we're looking at what information we can use to track the BMP program. It's really about those lower three tiers in the pyramid that I think you should still be seeing on your page. So one of the kind of fundamental ways to think about it is just tracking where implementation is happening. So if we don't know that the BMPs could be the best BMPs in the world, but we may not be able to get them placed on the landscape, and we might have to rethink how we want to go about doing that. So just tracking what BMPs are going into the landscape is one way to look at program effectiveness, but that only tells us that we're installing them. It doesn't tell us that they're working. So to think about if they're working or not, we need to look at those intermediate indicators. And there we're trying to drive a fundamental response in the watershed. And one of the things we know is or one of the things we can look at is those, this soil test phosphorus data. We can aggregate that at I think the zip code or the county to zip code scale, not at the field scale, but we can certainly look at trends in that data set. And also we have quite a bit of information about agricultural phosphorus inputs and crop production through various reporting entities throughout the agricultural community. So, we're going to look for those types of things to start changing. If we're BMPs, if we're expecting them to reduce fertilizer use, we should see fertilizer sales decline. If we expect them to, or if we think we're going to be able to use, if we start to see some of these changes in watershed hydrology, hopefully we start to see, maybe we can see some of the peak flow events start to get dampened down. So those are kind of the things that we can look at, kind of scaling up from there, and ultimately having some very direct testing and intense monitoring of those BMPs so that we do know that they work at a finer scale. And also doing, continuing to support modeling work that might help us understand as we understand these BMPs better and how they're going to work, representing them in some mechanistic models and trying to ask the questions about how that might work across the landscape.
All right, thanks, Josh. I think you got to the gist of another question with that answer about those monitoring indicators. Another question for you, Josh, about Indiana's participation. Is Indiana participating in this TMDL study, or is it just facilities from Ohio that are going to be included and affected?
So if that's getting back at the general permit idea, we're only proposing, implementation for Ohio facilities. Indiana, areas in Indiana are included in the TMDL. Those loads will be accounted for, but not allocated to distinct sources within Indiana. That would be an Indiana-led endeavor, not something we have the capacity to do in Ohio. So the loads from Indiana are accounted for, but facilities would not be included or in any permits, and there's no proposals on what those permits could look like or should look like for Indiana. That's a state level implementation decision.
All right, thanks. Question about the next couple of meetings, the webinar at the end of this month and the July in-person meeting. Do you know what time the meetings on June 29th or July 14th will take place? Paul, have you got that information?
Yes, I do, Barry, thanks. The July 29th webinar will be at 2 p.m. and July 14th, the in-person meeting, that's going to be from 4 to 6 p.m. and that will be held at the Bowling Green State University. And if folks are on the listserv, they'll get plenty of notices about that.
All right, very good. Thanks, Paul. A question here for Kirk, I believe. Will soil phosphorus test levels be part of the monitoring program?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. So another good question. And I think Josh did a pretty good job with this, but I thought I would just tag on and say that, there is a lot of work being done sort of in this area. So I know academia has looked at this, on a statewide basis, the soil test phosphorus level. So certainly something that, again, aggregated we could do at, potentially watershed levels. So I think that will be included to some degree. Certainly monitoring phosphorus cells is another thing we can look at. So just thinking of different ways this can be done. So, looking at phosphorus cells, we can do that through our plant health division. That's not necessarily where it's applied, but if you're looking at it at a larger area, such as this, we think that that's really relevant. And, something that we've seen a trend downward in So hopefully we'll see the results of that as we move forward. So we're excited about that. I think something else that I wanted to share, we've had a lot of questions of manure in this level. And again, we've looked at ag statistics to see how that is and to look at crop phosphorus needs. And I think we've compared those levels. Another area is edge of field sites. So certainly something that is being looked at, looking at soil phosphorus dust levels at one field that they may be higher, and then comparing it to another field where we would consider the range medium to low. So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this, and we will continue to do that. So we're excited, and all this information will be our adaptive management and really drive our program. So we're just at the beginning phases of that, but it will drive our program. So I think the overall answer to this is certainly yes.
All right, thanks. Paul, a question for you. How will 590 impaired water section be applied to this?
Yeah, we're not quite sure we understand that question. And so if the questioner could rephrase it, and we'll leave it at that unless Josh or Kirk could understand it.
Okay, thanks. So if that was your question, give us a little clarification there. One for you, Josh, a follow-up question. So each NPDES facility will still have its own permit, but the permit conditions that Ohio EPA approves or requires for each individual facility will be partially dependent on how well the collective group of NPDES facilities is doing in terms of overall load reductions. Is that the case?
So there would still be, most all the facilities have some sort of phosphorus requirements that they have to meet at a minimum based on their existing permit conditions. Most of the facilities in that group of 35, as we're imagining it right now, we're talking about mostly major wastewater treatment plants, some industrial facilities that have phosphorus in their effluent, and potentially some minor wastewater treatment plants that are on the larger side of minors. So those individual conditions would continue to exist, but I'm not sure if I'm completely answering the question, but there's definitely some dependence on the performance of the collective group. Knowing that we've utilized optimization to realize some meaningful reductions in the watershed, and that different facility and that most all of our facilities have optimized their treatment capacity. So everybody's really operating as well as they can with the technology that they have available. So kind of putting people on a somewhat level playing field starting out. So take advantage of the existing technology that's been optimized, and that's kind of the driving force for where we want to maintain permitted loads with the general permit. So it's a little bit of a mix.
Okay, thanks for that, Josh. Question for Paul on some funding for monitoring. With the recent $225,000 grant awarded to Ohio EPA for water quality monitoring, will jurisdictions in the Western Lake Erie Basin be able to request funding to support a local water quality monitoring program?
Hi, this is Paul. Thanks for the question. We're not sure exactly which grant, $225,000 grant, you're referring to. The tributary monitoring network that I spoke of a little earlier, it's got a network of funding. There's quite a few funders. A lot of it is from the US EPA's GLRI, and Ohio has negotiated with them to have USGS do a lot of that monitoring. Heidelberg, University of Heidelberg's National Center for Water Quality Research, they also do a great deal of that monitoring. This monitoring is very expensive. I said there's over 25 sites in the Maumee alone. These sites are over $50,000 just per year per site. So 225 wouldn't really go too far. We're not sure if there will be funding available at the local level. there's a lot of details that need to be worked out when any monitoring system is worked out, especially if our state agencies, following the credible data rules that we have to, if it's data that we're asking for, that we will act upon. So that's to be determined. On local monitoring, it could potentially be something discussed as we go through kind of the implementation framework of this TMDL after the PMR's proposals are seen.
Okay, thanks. Let's see here. I'm scrolling through the table for more questions. A few logistical questions that will be answered later on about the recordings and the resources on the web. Let's see here. All right, here's one here. I think this might be directed for you, Melinda. What are Indiana and Michigan doing? Would that be summarized on reports such as the integrated report?
Yes, so Indiana and Michigan also have domestic action plans that detail their activities in the watershed. And those would be available on their websites. I do not believe it is detailed in our integrated report. However, it could be on our, we could possibly have links to their information from our Ohio Domestic Action Plan website.
Okay, thanks. Here's a fairly deep, oh, go ahead. Was there something else?
Oh, no, that's okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Here's a fairly detailed question here. And Josh, I think this might be for you. You listed several existing programs such as GLRI, AOC, and H2 Ohio that Ohio EPA intends to use to meet reasonable assurances for non-point source load reductions. However, none of these programs are specifically targeted at meeting the nutrient reduction needs of the Maumee TMDL. In fact, phosphorus reduction may only be a peripheral goal of these programs. How does Ohio EPA intend to effectively utilize these programs to meet TMDL phosphorus reduction requirements when the agency has very little direct control over the goals, funding, and implementation of these programs?
So the I thought that was a great point, in that, we are, but all of these programs do have specifically directed resources to the Maumee watershed that are consistent with, at least in part, the goals of the TMDL. So not, it's not to say that any one of these programs is specifically there to address phosphorus, but that it's, part of a large portfolio of efforts, and many of them do have, prioritized resources within them because of harmful algal blooms and phosphorus loading in Lake Erie. So it's not to suggest that the programs should become solely focused on the TMDL, but that in part each of them plays a role in implementing the practices and projects needed to meet the TMDL's goals, and collectively, among other things, help demonstrate that the reasonable assurances are in place to meet the objectives of the TMDL.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Just a little check on time. We're about an hour into our webinar today. The questions have slowed down. We'll give everyone another couple of minutes here to see if we do have any additional questions related to the topic on the agenda for today. We do have some comments rather than questions. We appreciate those as well, commenting on the presentation today and some of the responses. We do appreciate the feedback. All right, I'm not seeing any more. Josh, I think we may be ready to wrap things up here. If I see anything else here in the next couple of seconds, I'll let you know, but it looks like we've come to the end of the question period.
Yeah, so thanks for all the good questions today. And I know there's quite a few that we didn't get to. We are planning to update our FAQ alongside the preliminary modeling results report that was hopefully close to that time frame to talk more about implementation. And also, some of these questions are things that we're working on in the preliminary modeling results. So some of this information might help direct the questions more directly, or kind of build things in a way that can kind of focus that conversation around some of the questions that we're not answering yet today. So with that, thanks for your time. Thanks for the feedback. As always, it's definitely helped us build a better report in TMDL.